Divisive diplomacy. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arriving in Washington ahead of a speech to the US Congress. At the invitation of President Barack Obama's political rivals, Netanyahu won't be visiting the White House, in a clear break with diplomatic protocol as he nears an election at home.
We have a voice. And tomorrow, as Prime Minister of the one and only Jewish state, I plan to use that voice. I plan to speak about an Iranian regime that is threatening to destroy Israel, that's devouring country after country in the Middle East.
Netanyahu is steadfastly against a nuclear disarmament agreement being negotiated between Iran and world leaders, including Obama, who doesn't appear very happy with his old ally.
We think it's a mistake for the Prime Minister of any country to come to speak before Congress a few weeks before they're about to have an election. It makes it look like we are taking sides.
The expected agreement with Tehran would see some international sanctions against Iran lifted in exchange for curbing its nuclear program.
What's the best way to ensure that Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon? Prime Minister Netanyahu thinks that the best way to do that is either through doubling down on more sanctions or through military action, ensuring that Iran has absolutely no enrichment capabilities whatsoever.
Obama prefers a softer approach. Talks between Iran and the world's most powerful countries are underway in Geneva, Switzerland. Negotiators face an end-of-March target to reach an outline of a deal. This week's discussions, though, are sure to be upstaged by Netanyahu's address to Congress. The White House says it agrees that Israel, the Jewish state surrounded by Muslim neighbours, would be the likely target of any Iranian nuclear attack, but the two allies clearly have some distance between their preferred methods for preventing such a catastrophe.
And for more on this, we are now joined from Tel Aviv by Efrain Kam, who is a Principal Research Fellow and Deputy Director of the Institute for National Security Studies in Israel. Meanwhile, in Tehran, we have Professor Sayed Mohammad Marandi. He is the Associate Professor at the University of Tehran. And in Boston, we have Jim Walsh from the Security Studies Program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. What a drama that is right now going on inside Washington. Never before between these two allies, an open fight to the rest of the world. Mr. Kam, what do you make of Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to Washington only to the Congress, not meeting the president? Is he looking for domestic political gains, or is he really, as he claims, looking at the real issue, which is the nuclear issue of Iran?
I would say that most of the Israeli people, in my judgment, will support Netanyahu for his decision to go to Washington and give this speech in the Congress. The problem is not the speech. The problem is that the coordination between the Congress and Mr. Netanyahu on one hand and the White House on the other hand was not good enough. And this caused all this friction and this misunderstanding between the two parties. But I think the mere decision to go and speak to the Congress, I believe, and many Israelis believe also, that this was the right thing to do, and even now, before the elections in Israel.
Okay, sir, may I just follow a bit? Do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu or Israel as a country will be able to afford the accusation that it is dividing the United States by going to the Congress, not necessarily working with the Democrats? Is that going to be a big load of pressure for your country when it comes to future relations?
In my judgment, first of all, we had several cases of such misunderstanding, friction, and pressures put on Israel for a variety of reasons during the last few decades. So it did happen in the past. And secondly, I strongly believe that eventually, sometime in the coming future, and both parties will find a way to overcome these difficulties and decide how to do it together.
Okay.
Because the relationship, the special relationship between Israel and the United States are much, much stronger than the personal misunderstanding that now are taking place between Mr. Netanyahu and President Obama.
Mr. Walsh, is it really the so-called personal misunderstanding between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu now? Or is it something much bigger than this?
Yeah, I think probably personality does matter, but that's not what this is about. I think my Israeli colleague is correct in saying that there have always been tensions between Israeli prime ministers and American presidents, Republican and Democratic, going back for a long time. Whether it was George Herbert Walker Bush or President Clinton, others, this has been a difficult relationship. But I do think it's gotten worse, and I do think it's because Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it more partisan than ever before. His speech before Congress is unprecedented. Never has a leader come and arranged a speech behind the back of a president against the objections of an American president. And I must point out as well that Israel's ambassador to the U.S. is a former Republican political operative. So I think Netanyahu has made this partisan. I think that undermines the U.S.-Israeli relationship. That's why 60 Democrats are not attending that speech today. But I don't think it's, all is lost. I think this is a difficulty. Then, that difficulty will be overcome. But I do think there's a danger here. If President Netanyahu continues in this direction, then it could risk irreparable harm.
Right. We all understand, Mr. Walsh, inside the United States, the Jewish lobbying power is very strong. And therefore, people are asking, what would this mean politically for the Democratic Party, and particularly for President Obama or the future candidates of the party once the relations between the two apparently is not going well?
Well, I would point out that I characterize it as a pro-Israel lobby rather than a Jewish lobby, because evangelical Christians and others are part of this coalition that is a pro-Israel lobby. I think Jewish Democrats, when you poll individual voters, Jewish Democrats are very supportive of President Obama. They're supportive of Israel, and so they face a tension and a split. Not every Jewish voter is admiring of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who runs a right-wing government in Israel, right? So they have their own political differences, just like the U.S. has political differences. But I think observers are worried because the younger generation of American Jews, polling information indicates, are taking a different point of view. And so I think this is something that's evolving over time.
Right, it might evolve over time, but Professor Marandi, see what the other two gentlemen have just said. They both, in a way, try to brush off what some consider as very serious split up between Israel and America, but actually, according to them, not really. Professor?
I would stress on another point, actually, and that is that from an Iranian perspective, what we are seeing today is a U.S. government that is extremely weak. The very fact that the leader of a foreign regime, a small regime at that, commands so much respect and power among the American political elite, where even the majority of the Democrat Party will be participating in Netanyahu's speech, despite the fact that the President of the United States is very much against his presence in the country, I think is quite revealing. And for Iranians, this raises questions about the ability of the United States to cut a deal with Iran. And even if the United States does cut a deal with Iran, does the U.S. President have the power and authority to carry it out?
Okay.
This especially at a time when, when the Israeli regime's leader has been on, it is well known that he has been saying for many years that Iran is on the verge of a nuclear weapon. And the Israeli regime has been saying it for 2 decades. For 2 decades, they've been saying Iran is 2 years away from a nuclear weapon. And it's obvious to everyone that they've been dishonest. And also very recently, as you know, the secret documents revealed, but belonging to Mossad, show that when Netanyahu a couple of years ago was saying that Iran is on the verge of developing a nuclear weapon, Mossad, the Israeli intelligence, was saying no. Iran's nuclear program is all signs show that it's peaceful.
We all read those information in the papers, and therefore I would like to have Mr. Kam to respond to that. Does Israel, at least the Prime Minister, been losing his credibility and therefore losing its credibility as a country in front of the United States, particularly when consider an issue as serious as Iran?
Let me suggest as follows. I believe most of the experts in Israel, and I think also abroad in the United States, in Europe, believe for a couple of years, for the last decade more or less, that Iran is really on its way to acquire nuclear weapons. Although Iran denies any intention to do it, I think there is no doubt today, because we know so much about the Iranian nuclear program from unclassified material that it leaves no doubt that this is the intention of the Iranians. The fact that until now, despite all the predictions, it has not happened until now, it is because the United States, and to some extent perhaps also Israel, did put all kinds of obstacles on the way, on the Iranian way to acquire the weapon. So it takes time, takes a long time.
So you are saying
eventually Iran has made a very long way toward.
Yeah. So Mr. Kam, may I just clarify a bit? You are saying Israel or Prime Minister Netanyahu has not at all, not even a bit, lost its credibility, his credibility, even though there were in the revealing information from the secret agency that he was quote unquote lying. So you think there's nothing like losing of credibility here?
I'm not sure that he lost his credibility, because he did manage to convince, after a couple of years, I put in a different way. 10 years ago, many experts in Israel, even in Israel, in the United States, in Europe, said Iran is unable or has no intention to acquire nuclear weapons. I think now almost all of the experts believe that Iran is on its way to get it. And I think to a large extent, it is because the Israeli government, under Netanyahu and under other prime ministers, emphasized time and again that Iran is trying to get the bomb. So I think from this viewpoint, he did not lose his credibility.
Okay. This is not a debate about whether Iran is going to get a nuclear bomb or not, even though that is also a very important issue. That's why we are talking back to you, Professor Walsh. Do you think Iran will be a big enough issue to split Washington and also Israel for now? Or actually, this is just a hiccup in the relationship. It's going to be gone very soon. Yeah. Or this is some role playing going on there between Israel and the United States for the eventual agreement or disagreement with Iran.
Well, I think it's more than a hiccup. I think this is a serious issue, and I think there's a serious disagreement. But at a certain point, Israel's going to have to decide what's more important, trying to stop this agreement or its relationship with its most important ally. And I think cooler heads will prevail. And at that point, they'll just have to swallow the agreement and move on. Look, that's what happened with the Joint Plan of Action. And this gives me the opportunity to disagree with both my Iranian friend, Professor Morandi, and my Israeli colleague. Professor Morandi said the U.S. is weak. Well, Netanyahu opposed the Joint Plan of Action, the interim agreement. He said it was the worst thing since Munich, blah, blah, blah. And he wasn't able to stop it. And this interim agreement has been operating for over a year and been a tremendous success. And so I expect that's the same thing that's going to happen with a comprehensive agreement that we'll arrive at in March and then July. There'll be a lot of whining about it and complaining, attempts to stop it, but those will be unsuccessful. And then they will, and then there'll be a period of unpleasantness, and then people will move on. As for my Israeli colleague, I disagree significantly on his characterization about the Iranian nuclear program. 10 years ago, that was 2005. Iran had 164 centrifuges operating then. It was possible to imagine that they could go towards a bomb if they wanted to, but it's the overwhelming consensus of the Israeli and the American intelligence community that Iran had a bomb program and stopped it in 2003 and has not made a decision to pursue nuclear weapons. So I just
see.
flatly think he's wrong about that. They have a nuclear weapons capability because they know how to make a centrifuge, but they have not made a bomb decision, and that's an important distinction.
You see, the Israeli-American relations is already complicated enough. When it comes to the Iran factor involved in it, it's just becoming ever more. Professor Morandi, before we go, we do want to invite your views here. What does this mean for the eventual negotiation? I think that is even probably the most important thing between the U.S. and Tehran for now. This, whether political hiccup or just a brief period of conflict between Israel and the United States, which side do you think is more pressured to come to an agreement? What does this mean to your country?
Well, I think for Iran, the bottom line is that all sanctions must be removed, every single one of them, and Congress must repeal the laws. Anything less than that would be a bad deal for Iran, and anyone who signs such an agreement in Iran would be committing political suicide. On the other hand, the Iranians, though, are willing to be very flexible. They're willing to slow down elements of the nuclear program for a fixed period of time, for a reasonably acceptable period of time, in order to create trust and to deal with any questions that may exist among Western governments. But ultimately, the Iranians expect their full rights to be respected. Obviously, since the IAEA has never shown that Iran's nuclear program has been anything but peaceful at any point in history, from the Iranian perspective, the United States stonewalling will only hurt the situation, and the Israeli regime's prime minister, his influence over Washington is unhelpful, and it's not good for U.S. interests.
I see Professor Morandi would rather talk around the point without necessarily focusing on what it might be for the negotiations. That could be some negotiation skills I see you are having right now. But let's talk about the future. From you, Mr. Walsh, very briefly, what might happen? What does it mean for negotiations? Very briefly.
We're going to get an agreement. Congress is going to try to stop it. They'll fail. They may pass a bill, but that the president will veto that. That veto will be sustained, and Congress isn't going to want to take responsibility for unilaterally killing an agreement. So I think we're moving forward.
We are moving forward. I hope so. But we want to thank you, the three of you, for being with us. Hopefully, we're moving forward together. Jim Walsh from the United States, Mohammad Morandi coming from Iran, and also Ephraim Kam coming from Israel. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.